All right, welcome to ENside Politics, the weekly podcast of how San Antonio politics really works. I'm Greg Jefferson. I'm a columnist and Metro editor at the Express News, and I'm joined today by two political smarties, two of the closest observers of state, local, and federal politics, Eddie Aldrete and Laura Barberena. You run a political consulting firm called Viva Politics, yes. Wildly successful. You're also overseeing Manny Pelaez's mayoral campaign.
Yes, I am.
Eddie, you, of course, are the principal behind Eddie Strategic Partners, Aldrete Strategic Partners, and you're the host, more importantly, Beyond the Bite, which is a great local political podcast. Welcome you both.
Thank you. Interesting fact, we were actually office mates for a short period of time.
Oh.
Yeah, we shared an office. We shared a space. Worse.
The fun question is, like, how long ago was that? 20 years?
It's been a while.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he was the worst office mate ever. Never interrupted.
Oh, do tell. Why?
Never tried to get me to not do my work. Just sitting there working. I'm like, what office mate are you? Aren't you supposed to, like, distract me so we can do fun things? But
there you go.
All right.
Anyway, he's a great guy.
So we are going to jump in to the city charter election, which hasn't gotten a ton of attention. But UTSA's Center for Public Opinion Research is taking care of that. They've done some polling. And if you're a supporter of these amendments, you're going to be pretty alarmed. The amendment that the city's business community, I think, most wanted to see was the removal of the salary cap on the city manager and kind of the striking of the tenure cap on Eric Walsh and every city manager who comes after that. This is something that business leaders have been pushing for over a year. I think they made sure that it was on Mayor Ron Nirenberg's agenda when he created the Charter Review Commission about nearly a year ago. And lo and behold, it is on the ballot, but according to the polling, it's doing pretty terribly. We've got about 69% of respondents opposed to this particular charter amendment. I should say just a little bit about the poll itself. It's Bexar County voters. They're all registered voters, 620 of them. The polling took place, I believe it was between September 11th and September 13th. So with those caveats, Laura, why is that particular amendment doing so bad?
Let's hope that they're not just Bexar County voters, but actually City of San Antonio voters. Right. So we need to start there. Like Bexar County is like, not all of Bexar County is going to be able to vote on this. So let's start there. Second would be my question. Obviously, being in this business, we are like, who did they talk to? Who was questioned and what were the criteria for that, right? And so this is a very sophisticated world in terms of like how you pick who you talk to. So registered voters versus likely voters versus likely municipal voters versus likely general election voters. Right. I mean, this is a whole thing. And then also modeling, right? So like you can't just do a blind model where you assume turnout is going to be the same throughout the entire city, but you actually weight the respondents so that where the votes come from, this is where you're actually getting the data. So we'll start there with like, I can't wait for it to actually become public. So I want to dig into it to see what is being said. But having said that, I think this, if this is the case, I think the business community has quite a heavy load to lift here coming up. And they know it. I think that, they've started a campaign. I think they've got Morgan, who's going to be running that campaign. So I think, they understand this is an uphill climb. I like to refer to this proposition as sort of affectionately as the Scully Steele effect, right? Because it was their little battle that created all of this.
Tell the story.
My God.
You can't just say Scully and Steele. And we all know.
Well, the Reader's Digest of this is back when they were trying to negotiate this contract a few years ago. Scully and Steele, who was the head of the union at the time, Cheryl Scully, who was you could read her book. I'm going to plug her book. Read her book because she quotes me in it. Selfless plug here. But, essentially, city managers, Cheryl Scully gets in this fight with the union because they can't come to agreement. So then the union basically puts up these propositions and uses it as leverage to get her out, right? And they succeeded. And essentially, one could argue that
this is in 2018. Right?
I have it as 2020. I think is what I have it as. But
no,
18. No, Proposition
18.
B, 2018. Yeah. 2018. Prop B was the cap salary and the term limits on that.
Yeah, and this was just a bloody fight between bloody fight. The San Antonio Fires Union and Scully. I mean, it had been carried out through billboards and media leaks, and it got
and the television commercials were salacious.
And television and radio. I mean, you rarely see contract negotiations break down that badly. I mean, it got to the point where you couldn't go into a bargaining session before passing through a metal detector.
Right. It was
somebody might be back in.
But interestingly enough, Eric was a part of those discussions, right? As his role as assistant city manager. Right. And so we've seen him use that experience to kind of come up with a nice contract agreement settled now without all the drama, the high drama.
And we'll get into the fire contract in a bit. And I'm curious about whether, because it went so smoothly, the union will actually, is there any chance that they help this city out and campaign, not just sit out this charter election, but maybe campaign on their behalf? But we can get that. That's a
no. Did you read the fine print? It's only for 3 years, my lad. Right. This contract is only for 3 years.
Eddie, what? There are questions about the polling, and obviously we're talking about registered voters versus likely voters. But I mean, nearly 69% is a lot to say no. What do you think's behind that?
I think Lauda, mentioned that this is Bexar County. If you live in Chavano Park or Alamo Heights, you're not going to be able to vote on these charter amendments. So. The industry group that is supporting Renew San Antonio did their own polling, and their numbers do not reflect this. And the difference is they interviewed likely voters, not registered voters, and they only interviewed municipal voters who can actually vote on this. So a big difference between the two. And I think what they're polling shows is two things. Number one, the propositions have strong support. Not necessarily all of them are over 50%, but that leads me to the second point, that the thread in their poll shows with education, with information, with a persuasion campaign, they can get to the 50% mark.
Right. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the only real constituency from my point of view for this particular charter amendment, that being the one relating to the caps on the city manager, is the business community. Renew SA is the PAC that will be running the campaign for the entire slate of charter amendments.
Are they though? Is that the answer?
Well, that's my question. Is
I don't think they're about all of them.
Their target is to raise between $1 million and $1.25 million for this campaign. So my question is how it seems like it's usually a little difficult to raise money for a charter campaign. Any sense of how they're doing toward that goal? Because having the money to do mailers and digital ads and everything you need to do to bring this to voters' attention, that's all about money.
It is, and they're no different from the general public in that, a lot of people still aren't truly focused on this particular part of the ballot. There's a lot of focus, obviously, on the presidential race and maybe a few other races. But so far, I don't think enough people are aware of all of the ballot items.
And in fairness, there hasn't been a campaign. So, you got to get the campaign going, and that's the other thing, too. But if they're just concentrating on there are A, B, C, D, E, F. There's a lot of propositions on this ballot. So
6, yeah.
Yeah. So are they going to, are they just going to solely focus on that one? Or are they going to go for the whole
Eddie, you read their, and by the way, we should note that the poll results you saw, these have not been released to the public.
Correct.
So, this is kind of an inside view. Is it likely the Renew SA focuses solely on, or not solely, but a preponderant, amount of their money goes to this proposition, this one city manager proposition?
Well, as you know, it's unlikely that they will solely focus on that. I think take a look at the big ones. It's hard to explain the municipal employee issue being allowed to vote. It's hard to explain the cleanup language.
Right. Yeah. So Eddie's referring to, there's one charter amendment to clean up outdated language in the city charter, and that you've seen the ballot language on that. It's kind of a mess. It's about 30. It's about 30 lines long, and it gives very specific examples of what'll be removed.
I think the easier ones to argue and to explain and to advocate for are raising city salaries for council members and the mayor, extending their terms from 2 years to 4 years. The city manager issue, and there's I think one or two others. But
the ethics one, which is so vague. It's kind of funny. It's like we want to define what is it? We want to define what special interest is. What special interest is, right?
And what a conflict. Yeah,
conflict of interest. That's what it is. We want to define what a conflict of interest is, and then we want you to give us enough money to fund that. Yeah. But yet they're completely vague on what sufficient funding is. We want you to be very specific on this language, but we're just going to be, very willy-nilly about how much it's going to take to do that.
It also allows, that proposition also allows you to bring, it allows the city's ethics review board to hear complaints that have been filed elsewhere. So, I mean, it can be basically like a court of appeals.
Not really, though, because they can't supersede a Texas Ethics Commission. Right. Like, it's going to be two separate,
I was being facetious, Laura. So anyway, but yeah, you're right. I'm in exact language, sorry.
I don't really know you, but but I mean, to me, it's like, okay, now we're going to let you double ethics someone. I mean, or double ethics complaint them. I mean, that's a really efficient way to use our tax dollars, I think. I don't know.
Now, to go back to the council pay, I'm going to have to read this because these are a lot of numbers that I have not memorized. So city council right now is paid $45,722, and I'm sure they earn every dime of it. The charter amendment would increase their monthly salary or annual salary to $61,725. For the mayor, the annual salary would go from $70,200 to $87,800,000. At the beginning of this,
87,800. Sorry, not 800,000. I just want to be clear. Did I say that? Yeah, you said 800,000. I was like, whoa, I'll run for mayor.
This is not Bexar County Commissioner's Court.
Yeah, that is. It's 87,800.
Yeah, 87,800.
Yeah.
Now, to my thinking, this would have been the most difficult one to sell to the public. Did you see it that way or no? And then we'll go into the
initially, yes, but the co-chair of the Charter Review Commission, David Zamiello, has talked about when the public came in for the public meetings, one of the things that they did was do a lot of research. They formed a subcommittee just on compensation alone. Right. And of course, David himself is a compensation executive, understanding compensation, what he did for USAA. But what they found in the public testimony and what they found in all of their research was most people were unaware that a member of the city council averages 60 to 70 hours a week. It's not just the A session. It's not just the B session. You have to add prep time for the B session and the A session. You have to add time for all the neighborhood association meetings. When you sit down with the police chief and you talk about rising crime in your district, you add all that up, and it equates to 60 to 70 hours worth of work. So it is very time consuming. And I think once people start hearing that and the fact that salaries haven't been raised since 2015, it takes on a slightly different tone.
Right. Yeah. Laura, what did you think? When council adopted these six, which did you think was going to be the toughest to sell to the public?
The toughest. Yeah. I'm going to go with I'm actually going to go with one that we haven't talked about, which is Prop F, which is the changing the term limits from 2 years to 4 years. I think that's going to be a tough lift because, council isn't like what other 4-year positions, judicial, these are like, council is really the bread and butter of your everyday life, right? It's how often your garbage gets picked up. If you're having a sewage issue, these are like really, the kitchen table issues that people deal with. And to not be able to hold your elected official who takes care of those things accountable every 4 years, I think that's going to be a heavy lift. I haven't seen any of the polling on that, but I would just think intuitively that, 4 years feels like a long time. Now, and I understand the arguments against it, which is like, well, 2 years, they're freaking campaigning all the time, right? But at the same time, you do have the ability to hold them accountable. And I will say this, as a member of this community, what I found disappointing too is just that we're not seeing any other changes with respect to their salary and these and their term limits in terms of like who can actually running for these positions. Right now, anyone can run. If you got $100, you can put your name on the ballot. Right. And that means you could potentially have a whole lot of people running for these spots because now it's actually a paid professional job, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We want more people to participate. However, that also means a lot of candidates who really aren't serious candidates who are going to be like, well, hell, for $100, I'll throw my name in there. My name is Juan Gonzalez. Let me, throw my name in there and see how it goes. And so I just feel like there is like you're opening a can of worms when you're not addressing some of these other structural issues that we need to ensure that we get the best representation here in San Antonio. We deserve it. We deserve the best. Right. And they deserve to be paid for the work that they do. But at the same time, I feel like there's other real important issues that we haven't addressed.
Yeah. I think your daily life is more impacted by the city council than it is by Congress or by the state legislature. And to your point about bread and butter issues. And I think if you go back to a most recent example, Councilman Mario Bravo was defeated at the end of his first 2-year term. Right. I think the question a lot of people still have is they did work in a recall mechanism, but how difficult is it to recall someone? I don't know the nuances of that process, but I think that's going to be part of the tough sell for that particular issue.
Right. And I mean, it's worth pointing out that, with 4-year terms, take a council member like District 2's Alan Warwick, who was kind of a disaster as a council member. He was a one-term councilman, 2 years. That was it. Under this, he could have been around for 4 years. So that said, looks like voter support for extending the term limits, not great. It's about nearly 44% opposed, nearly 43% in favor. So this is very close. Council pay, it's a little less close, and voters are not in love with it. 51% opposed to increasing pay for council and mayor, 27.3% in favor, with 22% undecided. How do you read that? I mean, is that it doesn't sound at all insurmountable, but what kind of campaign do you have to run to get public support, voter support to the yes column?
Well, I think you have a good example in former city councilwoman Ana Sandoval, who's part of the sandwich generation, sandwiched in between providing for a child and helping her mother. And so she ended up having to resign from council because she couldn't afford to live at that salary level. Currently, you have City Councilwoman Marina Aldrete Gavito, who has stated she's succeeded in her career, but then now she's being paid what she was making when she got out of college. But she knew that going in, so she's not complaining, but she's making a point. So I think it's something to be resolved between can we pay them something fair versus how do we make sure by raising the salaries we don't get professional politicians who choose, because it's supposed to be public service, not necessarily a career path.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality is we all know what council members do. The public, they really don't. I mean, they just, if you ask a normal person, hey, what does your council person do? They're not going to really understand that, right? They're living their daily lives. They're not weirdos like we are, right? So, I think part of this has to be the education of like what it is, the responsibilities that they do. Like, if obviously, like a lot of people don't know, like there's a major emergency here in San Antonio. Who heads up that emergency response? The county judge. So, so these are kind of things like people don't pay. This is just not part of their daily lives. So being able to have people understand the role that they do, right? And typically those who vote in municipal elections, who are very active in their communities, they understand because they pick up the phone and they call their council member when they have an issue. But there's some folks, a lot of people who vote in municipal elections who are just, who are avid voters, who are not as well informed, but, they want to do their civic duty and be a part of the process, but may not clearly have a clear understanding of what council members do, because it can be confusing, right? I mean, you can ask council offices versus congressional offices. When people call seeking help, they call the wrong office because they don't understand, these divisions of government and how they can help with the specific problems that they're dealing with.
Right. Now, how real is ballot fatigue? Because you've got these 6 city charter amendments sitting at the bottom of what will be a lengthy presidential ballot. It's going to be a lot of names to go through before you get to these propositions. How do voters react to kind of complicated city charter propositions after having gone through, dozens of national, state, and local races?
If it's convoluted or if it's difficult to understand, you'll oftentimes see people skip it, move over it, or vote against it based on how difficult it is to understand. And I'm thinking of the one where the ballot language is difficult to understand because the cleanup proposition.
Yeah, and then how much do they partisanize the propositions, right? To able to get folks to continue, especially here in Bexar County where it's obviously blue. Like, how do you partisanize these so that people feel they're doing not just their civic duty, but they're kind of following along their democratic values? And
is that possible with the city manager vote or is council pay? Can you?
I'm not on that campaign. I'm not on that campaign. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, this is, how can you make these democratic values so that people will see the importance of them in terms of their city?
What if voters opt to keep the salary and term cap on the city manager? Give me a prediction. What do you think is going to happen? That means Eric Walsh, the current city manager, is he's in that position for another 2 years, 3 years?
Until 28, I believe.
Yeah. What are the challenges for the city of San Antonio when they go out and look for a new city manager? What do you expect if you are kind of hiring under those restrictions?
Well, to some extent, you're going to be hamstrung because you can't compete with other major cities, and you might not be able to attract the talent that you want. However, having said that, Eric Walsh is a native of San Antonio, and he loves this city. If he could, he would stay under the salary limitation, but he wouldn't be able to stay because of the tenure gap.
Yeah, it's 8 years.
And then you have you would have underneath Eric, Assistant City Manager Lori Houston, Assistant City Manager Maria Villagomez, and several others that could easily be interested in wanting to apply for the position.
Yeah, I mean, and Maria Villagomez, I mean, she was a very close second. I mean, it was in some ways arguable, almost a toss-up between the two of them, at least from the spectators. I mean, given the public interviews, she was pretty impressive. Is there a danger that given the restrictions on the city manager, even those under Eric Walsh won't be particularly interested in the job and they'll just go elsewhere?
It's possible, but I think again, they would be interested in being city manager. I think they're all very strong candidates. They are all very sharp. They're very well respected. And when you look at what they each accomplish with their own portfolio, I think they would all be acceptable candidates to the council.
Yeah, but to use a baseball analogy, our bullpen is only so deep, right? Like at some point, there's not going to be a bullpen left.
Right.
And at that point, then what? Then we're going to have to go, try to find someone. And I think these salary caps and the limits are going to make it very, very difficult, right? I mean, yeah, we'll be okay for a few years, but then after that's gone, now what, right? And that's a serious position that we're going to be in, because city manager is such a critical role in our city government. We are a city manager-driven government, and that role is so important.
And the other thing you could see is one of the assistant city managers moving up, taking the job, but not staying the full 8 years because they got a few years of experience under their belt and then decided to go.
Put that on my LinkedIn and move on.
That's right. So I can have a great job in Dallas or Houston or Austin, but
and be
because
an assistant city manager
I've got four years left, and that's it in San Antonio. So
corporate boards are not hamstrung with their ability to hire and fire their CEO. And I don't think the city council should be hamstrung either.
By the way, Houston is a strong mayor's government. I understand that. My bad.
For all you haters, for all the haters out there,
don't bother
the
me.
Greg haters.
Don't bother me with your little email. All good. And I would imagine this has got to be concerning to economic development groups like Greater SATX if they, if you are a Fortune 500 company, you're thinking of expanding operations or even maybe moving headquarters. You probably want a city manager who's there for the long haul and not just the next 2 or 3 years.
Stability is at the top of the list of what people look for. Stability in leadership, not necessarily the people, but the actions and the philosophy and the focus of that particular community. So yes, this would be a little upsetting to companies looking to locate here.
And I mean, and Eric's done a fabulous job. The first time I met Eric was in the early 90s when I'd come in as a chief of staff for District 5 for Nora Herrera, who was an interim council person. And he was one of the first people that I got to interact with in city government. And he was just such a delight, so warm and welcoming, and understanding that there was a learning curve for me and my team, and just, and a San Antonian, like you said, like born and raised, how special is that? And for him to do just a fabulous job too on the firefighters, like he put this firefighters union contract to bed without going to arbitration. Like, that hasn't happened in a very long time.
15 years. It's been 15 years.
His tenure was fabulous, right up to the point where, as a Central grad alum, his son chose Antonian High School over Central.
For those of you who don't know, there's apparently a Central Catholic mafia. They run everything, including the city of San Antonio,
and a strong rivalry in Antonio.
And Eric is a Central Catholic grad.
That's right. And throw in Trinity's urban studies program too, and you've got the whole cabal taken care of. They're all well accounted for.
But it really would be a shame if this did not pass. It would really, I think we would, talk about going backwards.
I mean, granted, it doesn't look good right now.
No.
I mean, nearly 69%, given the limitations
Come
of
on,
this
renew
poll.
San Antonio. Go do your job.
I mean, Kelton Morgan and KGB Texas, who they're running the renew, they've got their work cut out for
them. But not to discourage your listeners, because again, this was a countywide poll, not a citywide poll, and it was registered voters, not likely voters. So I think you're going to see a different set of numbers.
Right. Yeah. Now, all of this, I mean, all of this being the city manager's proposition, removing his or her salary and term caps, goes back to this ugly fight we mentioned earlier with the fire union and Cheryl Scully preceding 2018, which was when this voters approved this. Very different scene now.
Yeah.
If you want to know how different,
very different. But
look at the council meeting where Assistant City Manager Maria Villagomez was presenting, and the first thing she did before she started her presentation is to say, I want to thank our partners in the Firefighters Association and all the leadership, including Chief Joe Jones and the rest of the team, because none of this would have been possible without them. You look at the praise that she gave them for working the deal out. The Maria Villagomez or Eric Walsh, Joe Jones relationship is quite different from the Chris Steele, Cheryl Scully relationship.
Well, and also, I mean, think about this. You're negotiating with charter amendment in the future, right? So they could have, like, the firefighter was using that to be able to say, we don't get our way, we're going to go after this charter, heavy to prevent it from passing. Yet in the midst of all of that, we didn't give away the kitchen sink. We were able to, we being the city, although I'm not a part of the city, but you know what I'm saying? Like, the city didn't give away the kitchen sink. Like, I think they reached a negotiation that was it was good for both parties.
Just to step back a little bit. So last week, the city council basically ratified the contract, a 3-year contract with the San Antonio Professional Firefighters Association, the Firefighters Union, as everybody else calls it. And this is going to cost the city about $110 million over that 3-year period, will result in raises of about 20% over that 3 years. And this contract was wrapped up within 6 months. Went fairly smoothly. It's funny, the most contentious part seemed to be not in the bargaining room, but at city council. We had a blow up in April where 5 council members felt like they weren't getting enough information about how the contract talks were going. They had a press conference. Some of them wanted to just fire Andy Segovia.
I think one of them.
I think one of them.
One did. But that wound up going nowhere, and we've heard nothing about it since then. So what they made nice.
What happened was they ended up meeting in executive session.
What happened was they wanted transparency, and they got it in executive session.
Yeah. So go back. So what did they get though? I mean, so did they get regular briefings on how the talks were progressing? How did that fight end?
Yeah, the issue was they were going one-on-one and visiting with each individual council member instead of meeting in executive session. So the 5 of them went public with their displeasure with the city attorney. In the end, they ended up getting the briefings in executive session. Yeah. And so you got to wonder. And I think it allowed Eric to have a conversation with City Attorney Andy Segovia and each of the council members to meet the 5 to sit down with Andy to explain their issues or their concerns. And it sounds like everyone's made up and they've moved on.
Okay. Now, and it was Councilwoman Melissa Cabello-Haverda who wanted, I think she was the most aggressive. And she was willing to kind of entertain the idea of ditching Andy. Not
willing, she did. She did.
She did. I mean, that's
entertained.
That is the city manager's call under our system. But council can obviously exert pressure. Now you had Melissa on your show Beyond the Bite not too long ago, last week. Did this come up at all or no?
It did, and I think that again she felt that she accomplished what she wanted to accomplish. It's difficult when you have someone like a city attorney because the city attorney is hired and fired by the city manager and they're not appointed by the council. So Andy probably got a little more public exposure than he was wanting.
Right.
But I think they made their point. I mean, they could have also, all 5, gone into Eric's office to accomplish the same thing, but I think they were frustrated.
Right. So the point being that if that was the most contentious part, that's not such a big deal. We heard a lot from the fire union back in, March and April. They weren't happy with the city's counteroffer. There were at least 2. But it all came together, and in the end was what looked like a very smooth meeting of the minds.
But still, just 3 years.
I'm curious.
3 years,
though. Before the contract went to city council to be finalized, it was ratified by union membership by 97%.
Yeah.
Huge.
Now, is anybody at the city looking at that at 97% and saying, wow, did we give away too much?
Well, keep in mind, this was the first time since 2009 they were able to vote on their own contract.
Yeah.
And so this was sort of a long time in coming. And regarding the process, I think it's a normal process. nobody ever resolves a negotiation within the first couple of meetings. Right. You start high, they come in low, and then you meet somewhere in the middle. And I think particularly part of the process is also designed to understand what are the main touch points or pain points. In this particular case, the firefighters weren't so focused on benefits as they were base compensation. So that became a major part of this conversation.
Yeah, and I also think it speaks to the association itself, right? That they have confidence in their leaders to negotiate on their behalf. Because if you have your leaders saying, okay, we've struck the deal, and then your membership is like, yeah, we don't want that, that means there's a problem going on with the communication of that organization. But clearly they were, in step with what their members wanted, to your point. So, I'm not surprised that I am surprised, but not surprised, if that makes sense.
Now, we'd mentioned, or I did, I'm curious about what role, if any, the firefighters union might play in the charter election. Is there any chance that they decide, their legislative committee says, okay, yeah, let's get involved, and we'll come in favor of the 6 charter amendments? Is that at all possible?
Don't see it.
It's always possible. It depends. They have to figure out how they want to spend their political capital. I think the question mark was always out there as to were they going to oppose removing the cap if they hadn't finished their negotiations yet and they hadn't achieved their goals yet. So that was always, I think, on the minds of a lot of people, that potential that they could be opposing some of the charter amendments.
Yeah, it's all about the political capital. I would think they'd stay out, because 3 years goes by really fast. And you're going to sit there and say, yes, we want this, and then turn around. I don't see it.
All right, so
I don't see it, but I don't see a lot of things, and then they so.
Last question. Do you think Joe Jones, the president of the firefighters union, does he or his leadership team regret what the union did in 2018 by putting these restrictions to
I think it's less of regret and how do I rebuild? You had a similar situation with the head of the San Antonio Police Officers Association. And in this particular case, they all knew very clear that it was a lot of landmines had gone off, and you have to kind of rebuild those relationships. And at City Hall, relationships are everything. So I think he did a really good job of maneuvering through this process, keeping his union membership together, and maintaining strong relationships with the negotiating team from the city.
Not an easy task.
Okay. Is that your final word?
Yes, that's my final word.
I mean, because you could apply that to the charter election too. Not an easy task.
It's just not an easy task.
All right. Thank you, Laura Barberena. Thank you, Eddie Aldrete. And thank you for joining us this week. If you have not signed up for our ENside Politics newsletter, go to show notes in our YouTube channel, and get to work, get signed up. Thank you very much, and we will see you next week.